interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine's Research Learning Series, or RLS. My name is Cole Ettingoff. I'm a medical student from Tel Aviv University and a member of the SAEM Research Committee. I'm delighted to be moderating today's session called What Your Research Team Wishes You Knew. While most of our membership are clinicians, largely physicians, all of us recognize that good EM research requires a lot of help from our teammates whose focus extends well beyond the delivery of immediate clinical services. From experts in survey design and data collection to funding and logistics and so much more, non-clinical researchers make research happen. As teammates who are generally dedicated full-time to EM research, many also interact with more EM research projects than an individual clinical researcher will. And it's that knowledge and perspective that we're hoping to tap into a little bit today. I'm really excited to have with us three really phenomenal leaders in EM research, each with a really unique background. I'm going to introduce each of them, and we're going to lead into a series of fairly rapid-fire questions. But for those who are joining us live, if you've got any questions along the way, please feel free to push those in the chat. We should have a few minutes at the end to get to those. So without further ado, our first panelist is Dr. Rebecca Cash, Assistant Professor of Emergency Medicine at Harvard Medical School and research staff at Massachusetts General Hospital. She completed her PhD in epidemiology at The Ohio State University, during which she was a research fellow at the National Registry of Emergency Medical Technicians. As an epidemiologist and health services researcher, Dr. Cash's research focuses on occupational health and safety of the emergency medical services workforce and pre-hospital care for high-stakes, time-sensitive clinical conditions. Joining her is Valerie and Mika, Director of Clinical Research Operations in the Department of Emergency Medicine Research at Wayne State University. She overlooks operations at Detroit Receiving Hospital, Sinai Grace Hospital, and Harper University Hospital. She has been working in the department for the past 16 years. She received her BS in biomedical physics with University Honors and her MS in biomedical engineering at Wayne State University. Valerie has helped submit 3 large NIH-funded consortium grants that have been funded in her department. She is currently finishing up her PhD in biomedical engineering and is passionate for emergency medicine research. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Julie Stilley, Assistant Research Professor at the University of Missouri and Director of Emergency Medicine Research. Originally trained as a traditional bench scientist, she was invited to restructure the research division of the Department of Emergency Medicine in the School of Medicine. There, she facilitates all aspects of research from statewide EMS programs, grant-funded projects and collaborations, medical student and resident research mentorship, and investigator-initiated or sponsored clinical trials. She has a wide variety of experience and expertise, but finds mentorship most rewarding. Thank you so much to all 3 of our panelists for joining us. We're really excited to hear about your perspectives. Before we sort of get into the meat and potatoes of this, I was hoping you could all just take just a brief moment to tell us a little bit about what your role is at your specific institution, because I know they can vary somewhat significantly from place to place. Julie, why don't we start with you?
I was hoping we would start in introduction order, but so I'm Julie Stilley, and I'm an assistant research professor, like you said. So if it has research in the title or in the spirit, I've probably received an email about it as it pertains to emergency medicine. So I help facilitate basically all of the research enterprises that go on, whether it be grants or programs, clinical trials, that sort of thing, here at the University of Missouri in emergency medicine, and facilitate collaborations beyond, as well as I have my own research. It's so much fun, and I love a very large and diverse team that we have in our division.
I love it. Valerie, can you tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure, and thanks for the introduction, Cole. So as you said, I'm the Director of Clinical Research Operations here at Wayne State. Essentially, that means I'm in charge of the day-to-day operations of all clinical trials that could vary from getting a study started, working with sponsors, negotiating budgets, maintaining the trials, the day-to-day of trials, being a resource for questions, whether that is with the IRB, with our staff. I also manage our staff and function as a liaison interdepartmentally and outside of our department as well, working with different departments, sponsors, institutions, other research departments. We're a pretty robust group. We have over 30 staff members, including full-time to volunteers, and we currently are running over 16 active trials.
Very cool. And Rebecca, do you want to round us out there?
Absolutely. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. So I am a full-time researcher in a clinical department. So I work in the Department of Emergency Medicine, specifically in a division called the Emergency Medicine Network, or EMNET. I am one of a handful, I think there's only 3 of us in our whole department that are non-clinical. And so my time is spent 100% on research. Almost all of my funding is grant supported, soft money. And so, I don't have clinical buy down like the clinicians. I split my time between conducting my own work. So I have my own grant, own projects. And then about half of my time is supporting other faculty members and our residents and other learners as a methodologist and a statistician.
Very cool. And we're grateful for these really diverse experiences and perspectives here. I think that'll really add to some of our next few questions. So let's get right to the heart of the matter. I'm going to lead with sort of an open-ended question here. But from your experience, what makes for successful EM research? Valerie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think there's a recipe, and that recipe involves having a very passionate PI and having dedicated staff that both have to have the willingness to learn. I think one without the other will not achieve the same success. And you have to have that willingness to learn other aspects, other information that may not be readily available to you or may not be within the clinical knowledge of what you learned in medical school or residency. So I would say that's a recipe for success.
Beautifully said. Rebecca or Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, I can add to that. I think one of the most important things is having a well-formed research project. So having a good research question, a well thought out study design and approach. And usually that means a strong collaboration with someone with methodology expertise. So that having them contribute to the project from day 0, rather than being brought in at the end, is usually what helps create a successful project. So starting from the ground up and building it that way.
My 2 cents is so EM is fantastic because it touches every specialty. And so that means you can and should get the absolute best of the best when it comes to collaborators. You aren't pigeonholed in one particular area. You have the breadth to experience lots of different areas in healthcare research on an emergency platform. And then one thing about EM research specifically that makes successful is emergency medicine in general is inherently a team sport, and that bleeds over to successful research teams as well. Emergency medicine practitioners in emergency medicine have lots of practice in closed loop communication or even incident command and that sort of thing. Feel free to move that even into the research sphere to have extra communication. And so it will really help formalize your thoughts and your success as a research team.
Perfect. I think, Julie, we'll pop right back to you with this next question. I think we've talked a couple times now about that interface between a physician, a clinician, PI, and those dedicated staff. What makes for a relationship with someone that you do want to work with?
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, I think finding a team, if you can find a common interest to sort of light the spark together, really does make for a good collaboration. As one of my colleagues just told me this morning, make sure the juice is worth the squeeze. And because sometimes research itself can be tedious, it can be drudgery, it can be repetitive. And for emergency clinicians, sometimes that is hard to overcome. It's a hurdle. Rather than, having your attention be drawn which way or another. So if you have that common passion together, that does make for a good collaboration, and you should always play to your team's strengths. So find your detail person, find your data nerd, find your methodologist, find your admin guru who can prod you together. Like, hey, that meeting you guys said you were supposed to have, when is it happening? Because I'm scheduling something today. That sort of stuff.
Valerie, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say having that open dialogue is so important, and making sure that, you're sharing your ideas and your opinions with other people. I mean, it's great that you'll let it fester inside your mind sometimes, but if you don't get other people on board, you might not have the resources, or you might not even know like what direction you should go in. So I think having that open dialogue, that open communication.
Rebecca, feel free to add something, but no pressure.
Yeah, I love collaborating with new people. I think it's one of the best parts of my job is to learn about what people's interest area are and then contribute to such a wide range of topics that EM can touch. So I'm always most eager to work with clinicians that have already identified like what they're very interested in. What's your research question? What's your area that you're interested in? So then we can work together to develop the best possible study, and I can contribute then my training and my expertise to make their project as successful as possible.
Very cool. I love this notion that EM research really builds on passion. I'm amazed just at the constant depth of passion that our researchers bring to the table. And it's exciting to see that shared in our non-clinical team as well. Sort of building on that, and perhaps on a slightly less positive note, what's sort of the flip side of that? What makes for a clinician that you might be a little less eager to work with, or something that can really slow down that collaboration? Valerie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I would say one that is not responsive, one that comes up with a great idea, has a great idea, brings it to the table, but then has no follow through, does not follow through, does not do their background research, does not see if this is an idea that they're passionate about, they should have looked it up. Has it been done before? Has it not? Is it been published? There's so many clinicians that will come up with a great idea, but then it's already been published. So why we don't need to restart, the wheel. And I think having someone that is willing to put in a little legwork. Yes, we do have staff that's going to be maybe helping do things along the way. But if you're not willing, like I said, to learn about the research process, to learn about how to appropriately and effectively write a proper protocol, learn what the IRB aspects are, it's not going to be a successful collaboration. So I think those are not clinicians I'm eager to work with. And then those that are also, like I said, not responsive. So if you have an active study going and you're expecting enrollments or you're expecting like certain criteria being done, but then you're not answering your phone, you're not responding to emails, it's really hard for us to do our job when you're not doing your part. So I would say those are.
Rebecca, anything to add there?
So my most challenging collaborations have been with people, and this is not specific to clinicians in any way, that just like Valerie said, they don't realize the time and the effort that go into doing good research. It's always the most frustrating thing to me when we put so much effort into getting a project going and maybe it doesn't even get off the ground, or it never makes it to a publication because other things took priority. And so, when that happens, I'm usually a little bit less eager to do the next project with that person.
So agreed. Research takes so much time. An item that can absolutely derail research is the literal amount of time it takes if you encounter, say, regulatory issues on a clinical trial or administrative bureaucracy delays like on a grant or a program or that sort of thing. The sheer amount of people that need to touch paperwork is just wild. So those things take time. One other maybe hot take, whatever, I don't know, on this is that I wanted to just remind everybody on the call that each type of researcher is trained in all sorts of ways. So as a clinician, even a clinician researcher, specifically in EM, you are absolutely trained to take very little information and, have an action right away, an actionable item. Dr. Cash was trained, in the epidemiology sphere, thinks you're giving me an N of 6. Are you kidding me? No way. And then I was trained as a basic scientist, where I think my little catchphrase is question everything, but especially yourself when you come from that realm. And so you're bringing these teams together. And so having respect for each of that type of training and then what those sorts of people bring to the table, it's challenging when not everyone at the table, has that respect for everyone. Maybe taking too long to make a decision or questioning something that we already decided that 20 minutes ago. Stuff like that. It can be a challenge to work with others in that way.
Interesting. So we've hit on sort of two common themes here, one being sort of the depth of expertise and knowledge and some of the specialized skills that a lot of our clinicians don't inherently have, and the other being sort of time and resources. Let's start with that knowledge piece there a little bit. I think especially when we talk to some of our younger clinicians, They're trying to figure out what kind of training, what kind of education do I need to be able to have that kind of experience. From y'all's perspective, you find that maybe a graduate degree, maybe a research fellowship, maybe something like the ASAP Embers course. Do those sorts of trainings and experience, are they helpful? Are some of them more helpful than others? Julie, I saw you nodding. Do you want to start?
Yep. So absolutely, more experience, the better. Bring it on. Love it. Love it. Though I will say research is more of a personality than it is anything else. The best and most prolific researchers are those who merely cannot help themselves. They lie awake happily thinking about how to solve the world's problems. And that's a personality all in of itself, compared to no matter how many letters you compile behind your name. It's those who are inherently curious and those who ask great questions that actually do great work. So if you are in a position as a trainee who, I just can't take any more training or I will jump off this cliff, that's okay. Like, your curiosity is more of an asset than anything.
I love that. The people who really just cannot help themselves. It's a drive. Rebecca, you seem to resonate with that. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, definitely. I have found that it really depends on the type of degree and the fellowship that they've completed as well. Not every master's degree is going to be research based, but what I have noticed is that clinicians that have that stronger background in research methodology are more likely to understand when something is beyond their own scope of knowledge and skills as well. Is often the case. You can know just enough to get yourself in trouble, or you can know just enough to know that you don't know what you're doing and to seek help when you get to that point. So the additional research training, it's not necessarily there to give you all of the tools. It gives you the awareness to know what you maybe should be doing, even if you don't have the full skill set to implement that analysis yourself or to design that whole study yourself. It's really the background knowledge that I think is so useful from that additional training.
Okay. So it sounds like Rebecca and Julie are strongly in favor of more training. Valerie, are you on the same page?
Actually, I wanted to say that I've worked with clinicians that both have had training, had gone and got a master's degree in different research methodology, and some that have not. And I've had successes with both. And actually, there's some that, like Julie was saying, sometimes, you need to have that like passion, as long as you're willing to learn. Once again, there are other resources that you don't need a formal education for. The IRB has so many open resources that will help guide, and sometimes it's on the job training. So as you do your first study, it's going to be very different than when you do a study 10 years after your first one. So I want to say that no, not all the time do you need an actual extra degree or extra fellowship to actually get into research. Sometimes it's just digging in and getting right down into the work. And that's when you're going to gain most of your knowledge, is from that real life experience.
I love that.
And I'm going to strongly suggest that you don't reread your first paper because you will be embarrassed.
I'm embarrassed by most of the things I write. But yeah, it definitely reminds me of a lot of the conversations that we've had within medical education of trying to train future clinicians, not just with the ability to sort of rote memorize and regurgitate things, but to think and to think outside the box and hopefully gain some more of those research skills as time goes on as well. So that's a lot of sort of the training pieces. The other thing that we hit on a lot of is the time and the resources that are necessary for going into this kind of research. Let's start with your time as folks who support clinical research in various capacity. Rebecca, I think you said you often split your time between sort of doing your own research and supporting the research of your division or your department. What realistically, particularly for an unfunded project, what kind of expectations could a researcher have? Can they come to you with questions if they don't have funding to sort of buy your time? You have the bandwidth to help think through projects, particularly in the early stages before we've gotten to the funding question.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical part, especially for like a junior faculty member or someone that's just starting to get into the research world. I am 100% soft money. Well, not 100, but it's very close. And so that means that, if a project's unfunded, I have a little bit of bandwidth to help out with it. But what I can be most useful for is sort of that initial planning stages. So come to me with some thought out questions and we can discuss through your project. And, when you're thinking about an unfunded project, or maybe an underfunded project, right? One that has a shoestring budget, there's a lot of ways that you can get into research without a lot of money And that can be where maybe someone like me or someone else, has some ideas of what you could do. Here's a research data set that's free that you could, consider, and that kind of thing. So maybe I'm not available to do the analysis for you, but I can also steer you to the right resources and, other people, for example, or even the funder, to try to get yourself a grant as well.
Julie or Valerie, anything to add there?
Yeah, as I was clicking unmute. Yeah, I was gonna say absolutely. I think come to us as, I'm the director of operations, right? But then like Rebecca, director of research, come to someone that you can speak to, whether it's a mentor, the director, whatever it may be. They can put you in touch with the right people. And for me, myself, absolutely. We do a lot of unfunded research. We want to promote junior investigators. Sometimes the funded research has to come from some sort of unfunding. It has to have some sort of starting point. So, and our IRB and our hospital research reviews, they waive fees for unfunded research. So if you don't have any funding, then there are opportunities for you to get a research started off the ground. Granted, you might not have the most resources as everyone else in the department maybe, but we can definitely assign you resources. We work with a lot of medical students, we work with volunteers, people that want to try to get a publication or are trying to, further their own education. So there is also free help that we can get you in touch with when you're starting to do a research project. And like Rebecca was saying, getting someone to help you kind of like navigate, is this the proper way to do the research? Are you looking at the right population? How can we help you kind of figure out that those pieces to make it a more streamlined project?
Love that. And kudos to Wayne State for being able to waive some of those fees for unfunded research. Julie, do you have anything to add?
Just that we're pretty much happy to help sort of think through a pilot about anything. But again, EM research is a team sport. And so it will probably include a number of people who may be not the first person that you communicate with, like Dr. Cash was sort of saying, but maybe somebody else on the team. The thing is, one-off pilot studies have to be thought through very carefully. How interested are you? Are you a junior faculty member and you're like, I feel like this is where I'm headed. This is the area that I'm really interested in. I just don't have the resources. There's probably going to be more enthusiasm for your project and helping you when you're resource limited than if you're like, I just had this crazy wild idea and let's just try this one time. So that might not garner as much enthusiasm as some others. So make sure to keep ultimately strategy at the back of your mind. Unfortunately, there's got to be a golden green light at the end of the tunnel in a lot of ways because research is expensive with people, expensive with supplies, that sort of stuff.
Which I think transitions beautifully into my next question. Sort of where are those hidden expenses? I think especially early on in our research, we think, well, the patients are already coming in, oftentimes are already doing a decent range of diagnostics on them. We've got some bandwidth to do institutional support for this. Other than strict staff support, things like stats analysis or things that require man hours, what other sort of expenses should we be thinking about in those early days of forming those projects? Whoever wants to lead that one, go ahead, Julie.
Okay, I'll start. So depending on the type of research that you're doing, it sounded a bit more like you're thinking an interventional sort of study. Is that kind of what you were sort of thinking, Cole?
Sure, for the sake of argument.
Yeah. So there's a lot of costs in like investigational pharmacy, staff costs, actual supplies, monitoring, those sorts of things to keep on the up and up on the regulatory side. When you're thinking of clinical trials, it's very, very expensive to run a clinical trial shop, as Valerie can attest to. If you are thinking something more entry level, like a retrospective chart review, by all means, you get the appropriate permissions to do those things. And that's just your manpower. And that's how much you cost, and perhaps statistical or methodological support on the front and middle and back ends, of course. So that's, how much you're willing to volunteer your own time to do those sorts of things. Yeah, depends on the study, I think.
And I think it depends too. Is this a device trial? Are you providing the device? Are you purchasing the device? Is the sponsor providing the device to you? If it's a drug trial, are they providing the drug? Are you paying for the drug? And then you have to pay for the pharmacy fees at the hospital. And then we also have to pay for, so we have services like Encore that we use to enter in data. And we use, and then there's the IRB fees. Are you going to a central IRB or is it a local IRB? Those have separate fees. We have a DMC research review also that has a separate fee. So you're paying for all of these different, is it a REDCap database that you're going to be entering this in, or is it a sponsor-based database? Those are all costs that sometimes you're not thinking of. You're just thinking, yeah, there's staff available. They can enroll for me. No, it's not always that easy. There's a lot of negotiation that goes in when we deal with sponsors and to say, you have to pay for these certain costs. Who's spinning down your lab? Are you using a central lab or are you using a local lab? If you're using a central lab, are you shipping? Who's shipping the cost? There's so much that goes into that we don't expect clinicians to have memorized. We don't expect clinicians to be like, oh yeah, I got to think of all of these things. I mean, there's a reason why there's someone like me in place that could help streamline that or that negotiate those budgets further. So we can be like, what are we missing? And then how can we make sure that we're not going into a deficit trying to run a research study?
Great questions. Definitely demonstrates sort of the complexity of some of these things and the need to engage with the research staff early on. Rebecca, do you want to add anything before we move on?
I think it just very much depends on the type of study that you're doing. You can do a free analysis with a publicly available data set, right? Or you can do a trial that costs $1 million. So it's going to depend, and that's where you should use your resources in your department and your institution to make sure that you are covering all your bases.
Which I suspect for this next question, the answer is often going to be it depends as well. But let's just talk for a second about the timeline. If I'm doing something simple like a chart review, perhaps a more abbreviated timeline is feasible. But for stuff that involves perhaps a little funding, perhaps an outside grant application, realistically, what kind of timeline should people be approaching you when they're designing those early projects until they're expecting something to actually be happening in a clinical setting?
I'm going to give you the epidemiologist's favorite answer, which again is it depends. It's going to depend completely on the type of work that you're doing. With NIH, it usually takes at least 9 months to get, from submission to getting the actual grant, the notice of award in hand. So, it can be years if things are not lining up, if you're dealing with some red tape and that kind of thing.
I'm going to agree. It depends on the type of project you're doing. I mean, if you're now just coming up with a brand new idea that has never been done before and you plan on expecting a grant within a month, it's probably not going to happen. But if you have a little more time, like a year's time, because you have to meet with all the appropriate people, you should be meeting with your mentor, you should be meeting with the statistician, you should be meeting with all of these, having all your ducks in a row before even approaching, let's submit this. Our own sponsored program here expects at least a 2-week prior notice before they can even press submit for it to go to an NIH grant or any other funding agency. So you have to build in all those institution timelines too. So just because the deadline is next month, you're not going to hit that deadline if you're not also meeting your own institution deadlines.
Julia, I saw you smile at the notion of getting a grant in a month. Is that wishful thinking?
Unless you know somebody, and if you do, you please introduce them to me. And my answer to that is probably about 2 years. I think a simple project that requires just a little bit of funding takes about 2 years to go from start to finish on average, but it's always 3 times longer than you think it will be.
Reasonable guess there. So Valerie, you mentioned sort of the institutional side of this, that within an individual department, you may have some teams, but once we start talking IRBs, once we start talking NIH submissions, it spans well beyond the department pretty quickly. One of the things that Rebecca mentioned earlier as well is that EM can reach a lot of different specialties. So that it's very common for us to be collaborating with cardiology or GI or what have you. How much interaction would you have as a EM researcher with those departments? Is most of that going PI to PI, or is a lot of that happening at the level of non-clinical support staff?
So I, as a clinical support staff, deal a lot with the other departments. I mean, I would say most of our studies, if not all of our interventional studies, usually have some other partner involved, whether that's the trauma team, the neuro team, the neuro ICU, the neurosurgery, the cardiology, internal medicine. So anytime a patient is admitted, and that's on from the get-go, we have to get other people involved. So usually that could be me meeting with PIs, or that could be the PIs to PIs. That could be us setting up meetings where we can go to staff, their own staff meetings, cardiology staff meetings, where we can set up trainings, because what's important is when you do have collaborations, you have to make sure that there's buy-in from them, because that's one thing that could definitely derail the product. If you never spoke to the neurologist about a drug that you're going to be giving for 7 days while that patient is inpatient, then you're probably going to have a problem. And we actually have experienced that personally. So it's more of that, you learn through your mistakes. But so now before any project we start that we know that we're going to have to collaborate with another group, we have to meet with them sooner, and it's multiple meetings. So we're already doing our emergency medicine staff meetings to notify all the emergency medicine physicians of what's going on, but we're also going to all of these other staff meetings or monthly meetings. You know, we even do like their sometimes they have like journal clubs where our physicians will come on and speak to their journal clubs. Could be I've done some education on like certain protocols that we're going to be approaching, what their role is in that protocol. So I would say we deal a lot with collaboration. And it's important because sometimes the PIs may not always be involved. So we have to be prepared also as a study support staff to go in there to be prepared to speak to these other PIs about what's happening, what is going on with this patient, and how they're being treated.
Beautifully said. Rebecca, Julie, anything to add on that one?
I often wear the PI hat, and so I have to make those collaborations and make those connections. But as the sort of statistician and methodologist in projects, oftentimes I find myself talking to a wide range of people about their data and, you know, having to figure out where they got their data and how we can get it. And so, yeah, I think we just touch a lot of different worlds, and people may not realize some of the legwork that goes into a good research project.
And I've seen all sides, from the PI down to just study staff. And yes, sometimes the collaborations wind up in your lap and you're like, go to these meetings. And then sometimes you're trying to curate them yourselves. So, but yes, collaborate, do it early, do it often, all sorts of things. It just improves your projects.
Collaborate early, collaborate often. That'll be Julie's quote for today. Rebecca, you talked a little bit about that data exchange, and you know, one of the trends we've certainly seen with emergency medicine is more and more data, bigger amounts of data, and sometimes data from multiple sites or even multiple institutions. If I'm a researcher at another institution, I'm coming to you saying, hey, I'd love to collaborate across multiple sites here. What are some of the things that you're looking for from me to make that kind of collaboration possible or successful?
That's a really good question. Whenever you're sharing data between institutions, there's usually some amount of red tape. There's going to be data use agreements and cooperative agreements, and, you know, someone's paying someone for the transfer of data most usually. So, you know, if someone comes to me and says, I have data that I want to share, then we have to start going through, there's usually like an established process. And this is where you should lean on your, you know, research support staff to guide you through that process. You know, if it's a private company, sometimes it's a different process than if it's another academic institution. And so there's a lot of nuances to data sharing, and it's actually sometimes even more complicated to bring data in than to share it out. So, you know, you have to lean on the people who know what they're doing to get that. And this is where, like, finding a research mentor, whether it be someone that's another clinician or an academic researcher, or even for something like this, you know, the clinical research support staff, lean on their expertise while you figure out how to do that kind of thing.
Institutional knowledge can go a long way. Julie or Valerie, anything to add on that? I know it's a little more niche.
Yeah, if you were coming to say we want to collaborate, I'd say, okay, show me the money. Let's see what you got there so we can see what we can provide. I'd say that's, unfortunately, that is a part of the big discussion. You know, how much is it going to cost to actually collaborate with you? Is it just the data, or do you want us to be enrolling patients? Are you looking for a multi-center project? There's so much that goes into that. Are we using the same database? There's a lot that goes into that, but sometimes money is what holds up a lot of collaborations from happening.
There's also legalities. So like if you collaborate with those, say outside of the United States, if you traditionally work in the United States, but then you decide to use collaborators who are outside of the United States, there are a lot more and different regulations than you would ever anticipate. Even trying to get somebody to get de-identified data to them so they can help you run some math is complex, and it requires permissions on both sides. And yeah, it's super fun to try to regulate that red tape, like try to wade through it. It's complicated.
Talk about some specialized knowledge there. That's one where you really need someone who knows what they're doing. So let's zoom back out for just 1 second here and think beyond just sort of specific projects. We see a lot of departments over the last few years. We've seen more emergency medicine departments split off and become their own departments. We've seen a lot of institutions pushing this idea of scholarly productivity from a department side. What can we do if we sort of have an unlimited reach here to create an environment where research can really thrive? What would you ask of your vice chair of research, of your department chair, of your institutional leadership to create an environment where EM research can really be prolific?
I think it's always going to take dollars. Unfortunately, good research takes good amounts of money. Also having mentorship in your department, and it does actually need to be in your department, but especially for junior faculty, but identifying research mentors to help guide people through the process so that they can be writing grants and getting those grants to bring in that money. That's a fundamental step. Once you get the grants, then you have to do the work. That's sometimes people forget about that. And so investing in the staff to do that work then is necessary. If you're going to be collecting data, you can't rely on one person or the PI, then you need to be hiring. And so supporting the conduct of the research is also really important, from your RAs to your statisticians to your grants managers, who are oftentimes unappreciated in this process of managing the money part of it too. So all of them can sort of come together, these key roles, they can come together and build this culture of research in a department.
Love that phrase, culture of research. Valerie, Julie, what can we do to help build that culture of research?
I would say promoting junior faculty to come in and actually like present their ideas. Sometimes they may be like intimidated by, I don't know, this idea might not be that good. So I think it's, having that mentorship is important, but also, having that allowing them to come in, have a safe place to come in, have a discussion about their project. Now, our department instituted what we have like monthly think tanks, and I assume most departments have something similar where you can come in, present your idea. Sometimes it's scary. It's a very scary process because you might get butchered. But I think having that open line of communication to say, come on in, let's present your idea. Let's see how we can get you to that next step, because starting research is scary when you don't have that experience. And if you have someone in your corner pushing you, you're more likely to jump off and have more scholarly productivity.
So you can always join Valerie for her monthly Shark Tanks over there. Julie, any other ideas?
Sure. I've got one general, one specific. So one general idea is that not everyone's going to be the PI. So the culture in your department needs to be inclusive of those who are supportive on the team, whether you're a co-I, maybe you're a junior person and you just want to get to know what it's like to be on that team and that sort of stuff. So we should be cheering, we should be celebrating those who just want to get on the team, in the team. Perhaps your strength is not going to sleep thinking about neurological disorders in the ED. You don't happily think about it as you drift off to dreamland, but you do have other strengths that are really useful in research. Well, come on, please come. Now, when it comes to emergency medicine, and this is my very specific thing. So emergency medicine research is somewhat new, right? Just as new as the specialty is new. And that means your institution may or may not feel the most comfortable with the things that you want to do. And I'm sure Valerie's going to nod her head shortly here. So I have definitely had to push my institution. So I'm going to put like clinical trials hat back on. And that means pushing my IRB to do things that they are not necessarily comfortable with, but it doesn't work. Traditional standard office clinic visit doesn't work in emergency medicine research. in trials of those sorts. And so I've definitely had to push, and that means I've had to take seats at the table. At every table that anyone would ever let me sit at, I have to sit. And then I try to share my agenda, gently nudge my agenda of be more accepting of emergency things. Maybe not all of our patients have capacity to consent to things, but that's okay because there are mechanisms that are available. Let's lean into those. Let's make it available. And it just allows clinical research to just expand that much further when it comes to that. So my suggestion to when you cultivate that is have a department chair who actually encourages you to go out and sit at those tables and push them, make a few waves, have somebody print you out a snowflake flag that you wave at meetings like I do. True story. Those sorts of things, it really push your institution when it comes to making electronic signatures available. Do you have the right interventions in those ways that, you know, facilitate emergency specific research?
Beautiful. You hit on something that I think ties nicely into one of the questions that we've gotten in the chat here. And that is, as someone who is recently out of residency, is looking to build my career as a young faculty member, what should I be looking for in emergency departments that are prepared to support research? You mentioned that EM research is still relatively new, and while many of my colleagues in other departments are looking for departments that have a long history of NIH funding, I know that has some real limitations in the realm of EM, where we've been traditionally underrepresented in NIH funding. What other metrics should I be looking for departments that are prepared to support prolific research? Rebecca, do you want to start us off? Feel free to bounce it if you don't want.
Sure. No, so I think it very much is going to depend on your field, your very specific field. You know, if you identify that there are some mentors in, you know, my research area is EMS, right? So if there are mentors within the EMS space that are publishing and presenting, you know, that might be the best match. You know, if it's cardiology that you're interested in, or obstetrics, or whatever your topic area, you know, if you can identify that there's a mentor there that would be also willing to mentor you, they would probably, that would be the best spot, because then you have someone who maybe they don't have a track record of grants, because you're right, in emergency medicine, it's grant funding, it can be very challenging to receive. But if they have a track record of success in doing research and publications and that sort of thing, then they can help set you up for success in the future.
So mentors in your sort of specific niche there. Julie or Valerie, anything to add to that? Go, Valerie.
I would agree. I would say, yes, not everyone is going to have the top 10 ranking for NIH funding, but they could be doing other projects. So we do a lot of industry-based projects. So I guess it depends on the type of researcher you want to become. And also, as Dr. Cash said, you know, is someone that you've read a paper about that, you know, you have interest in, are they at that institution? Granted, they could leave at any time, but knowing that they have there's a support system there. I think it's really important to, like, at our department, you know, knowing that there are a director of operations, you know, we have a regulatory coordinator that does all of our IRB work. We have a grants manager. Like, are there other resources that can support the research that you want to do besides just that mentorship? Because sometimes you might need that extra help. Do they have study staff that's available that could come in at any time that is well trained to do a research project? If you're going into a research interest, the department should have some sort of, like, fundamentals in terms of what, you know, resources to have. Also, buying down your time. Like, if you really want to concentrate on research, you need to be sure that you're not working all these hours clinically with no time to actually do the research. So there has to be that healthy balance.
Infrastructure and resources, two things we'd all love to have more of.
Yeah. So you were looking for maybe a metric as you're trying to search for potentially a position after residency. Is that right, Cole?
If you've got a magic metric, we'd be happy to take it, but
Yeah,
anything else that we should be looking for?
My magic metric is when you ask, you know, the prospective place you're potentially interested in working at, and you say, I'm interested in doing some research, take a note of the people they want to introduce you to during, like, an interview. Is it just the vice chair of research and that's it? Is it, oh, we can give you this entire laundry list? It's very interesting to see what resources are available on that list beforehand. Like, are they introducing you to the research operations manager? Are they introducing you to, well, we don't have a lot of research, but this other department down the hall does. And so I'd love to introduce you to their vice chair, et cetera. That is a good giveaway that they have their thumb on the pulse of research, even if they don't have a super robust program yet, and they're trying to recruit you to help be part of that new robust movement towards research. You can sort of guess who they're plugged into, that sort of thing.
I love it. Mentors, infrastructure, resources, some experience doing it, all things that we should be looking for in our departments. I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we're talking to two phenomenal female leaders within the realm of EM research. And I think we're all cognizant of the fact that we have an underrepresentation of females within EM research. I know this is the sort of $1 million question and something that could easily become several webinars in its own right. But from a departmental side, what can we do to be encouraging more of our female clinicians to be entering into that realm of EM research? Rebecca, do you want to start us off? Feel free to
I will. Actually, I wrote a paper about this not too long ago. So I think that there's a lot of sort of soft things that need to be accounted for. So we've done some work that showed that there's more often a conversion from an abstract first author being female to a male publication first author than that it goes the other way. And so I think there needs to be an understanding that, especially as a woman in academic medicine, I have children, I have other responsibilities, and maybe I'm not going to get that draft of that manuscript out in a year, but give me 6 more months and I'll be able to do it. So having some flexibility and understanding that there are other pressing priorities in anyone's lives. This is not specific to, being a woman or a mother or anything. And letting people have that chance to finish up a project or to have that project, I think that is super important. There's also, a lot of pushes in some institutions to provide supplemental funding. So like for childcare. So if you have to travel to a conference to present your findings, which is critically important to build your career, but that comes with a cost. And it's not just the cost of your air, flight and your hotel. It's actually having someone that can be there for your children or your, the parent that you have to take care of at home or something like that. And so I know my institution does provide occasionally some additional funding that you can ask for. And so that we can cover some of those costs that are sort of hidden.
Very cool. Valerie, I see you came off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's important to keep in mind. I know the question was about bringing more female researchers or clinicians to the table, but it's important to think that, anytime we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else, right? So whether that's in our personal life or in our career or whatever it may be, when we say yes to say, agree to do something else is going to have to give, something else is going to get the short end of the stick in that way. So it's important to note that, like, as women, we wear multiple hats. As I'm walking around pregnant right now in the office. So it's one of those things that, we have to be flexible about. Sometimes it's, because we have to childcare. I will not travel to conferences now because it's high risk. So then does that make me any less of a researcher than someone that can travel to conferences because they don't have that risk in their pregnancy? So, it's just important to find a great team. And I would say that we have an awesome leadership here that's really supportive of women. That's probably why I'm in this position that I am in. And then they understand. So I think it's important that we have that open mind. But as Dr. Cash was saying, it's not always just a women thing. Plenty of men have other issues. They have children also, they have families also. So when they say yes to something, they're saying no to something else. And usually it's your personal life that has to give.
And Julie, anything to add there?
Just the diversity begets diversity. So the more diversity you have seated at your own table, the more likely you're going to recruit others who, maybe have some demographics that you're really interested in getting their voices at your table too. So if you don't have it now, find ways to do it, find others ways to bring it in, and that might be including, search panels that aren't full of just your department, but others as well, that sort of thing.
Awesome. I know we are just about out of time, but I do want to end with something I think is a really fun question. Thinking sort of more broadly about what we're doing in EM research, the things that could be coming down the pike over the course of your career in EM, over the course of your lifetime. What's something that you would like to see us what you'd really like to see come to fruition within EM research? Julie, you see like you're nodding there. You want to start us off? No? How about you, Rebecca?
Well,
I can if you want. What I hope to see, and it's, I guess, less research and more improvement in how we collect data, but I really hope that at some point we'll get to the point where we can link data from the entire healthcare continuum together. So from the pre-hospital and EMS setting to the ED, to what happens in the inpatient setting, to even outcomes, 90 or a year later, 90 days or a year later. And when we can do that, I think that it's going to open a lot of doors for us to really understand how we can improve patient care in every setting. And sorry, Julie, if I stole your thunder.
absolutely did. And I knew you were going to, because I know we're on the same page there. But I'll take a sharp left turn. So one thing I'd love to see, so as a trained basic scientist, there's not a lot of models in an emergency setting because so I was trained with like lab animals and that sort of stuff. So in the emergency setting, we don't know what happened to lab animals in that very short amount of time where emergency care would exist. I would love to see people investigate translational sorts of things specific to emergency medicine. So one of my big things is it is actually unethical to provide a lot of comorbidities in lab animal models, yet think of your patient population. So you can't have somebody with there may be a type 2 diabetic mouse model, but you can't give them sepsis. Well, how many patients present to that into the emergency department every year? So you can't do that because it's unethical, but I would love to see an expansion of sort of those translational elements so you can really get at those what critically matters in that emergency first steps rather than over a course of a lifetime with just the one problem or the one disease or one gene knockout or you name it.
Valerie?
Yeah, I have two things to add. So I wrote a grant this past fall that didn't get funded, wah. So if that were to get funded and done, that'd be great. It was actually based off kind of what Dr. Cash was saying. It was looking at a continuous monitoring device in EMS and then taking it all the way through when the patient is in the ER and then inpatient. So I thought that'd be really cool because of that biomedical engineering background that I have. I always like to see if there's ways that we can incorporate more of that in research. And then something that Dr. Cash also said, taking that from having all that data from EMS to inpatient down the line, but also integrating different hospital systems because all the different hospital systems have their different EMR systems. Some of them don't all collaborate together. So if a patient went to another hospital, you're not always getting that data. And unless you're asking them, unless you're getting the medical record, but if there's a way that you can kind of link all that information. And so when a patient comes in, if they had not been to that hospital before, you're not having just some record of them 10 years ago that's not accurate. You're having the most accurate information all the time. So if there was a way that we can kind of cross those institution barriers, I think that'd be great.
Well, it sounds like we've certainly got our work cut out for us. But I think from all of us who work on the clinical side, we're deeply grateful to have our non-clinical research partners with us along the way. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us, and special thank you to the SAM Research Committee for continuing to support this series. This recording will be posted on the RLS YouTube page and will continue to be available on the SAM website. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next sessions.